now. The writer, comedian Graham Linehan has returned to the social media platform X after being banned by the Met Police. He's still under investigation for a public order crime and will have to answer bail later on this month. Now, the Free Speech Union announced they're helping the Father Ted co-creator to sue the Met Police after the Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, defended the position of the force, saying that it had no choice but to arrest him. Founder of the Countess, Alicia de Brún, joins us now. Alicia, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks very much indeed for coming on with us today. You say that his arrest will backfire on the UK. Why do you say that?
I think when something of this nature happens so publicly, whereby a comedian and a well-known and well-loved writer is arrested by 5 armed police officers in an airport, the sense of overreach is so apparent. And even, you saw his long-term opponents condemn the arrest.
Yes.
And that's when you know, when your opponents are also condemning the action, that's when you know that it has been kind of overreach and it will backfire. Because really, I think it's the swan song of an ideology which is losing traction, public support, and of course has been very much clearly stated by the UK Supreme Court that trans rights do not extend to access to opposite-sex spaces, which was particular to these tweets. That was the premise of these tweets. So Graham Linehan wrote 3 tweets, and one of them was perhaps talking about how a woman, if she was accosted or if there was a male in her space, as a last resort, the way he worded it, he should punch them in order. But the context was self-defense. But the bigger question here really is, how can tweets, posts online lead to an arrest? And you mentioned Sir Mark Rowley,
yes,
the most senior police officer in the UK, and he has since said that he is demanding a shake-up in the law whereby police officers will no longer be compelled to investigate these sorts of matters where there's no real evidence of any intent to cause any real-life harm to someone. People do let off steam on online, on Twitter and on different platforms, and really those platforms have become the public square, where we can kind of argue about politics. And really, it was a sad day for free speech and for Britain as a country and its reputation to see that happen. I mean, it was such a both kind of farcical and also horrifying in its kind of totalitarian overreach.
The only thing I would say, because I'm a big admirer of his work over the years, obviously, but some of the tweets and how crude and provocative they were, that would be my only question around some. I mean, the one I think you're referring to, he said if a trans-identified male is in a female-only space, he's committing a violent, abusive act, make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls. And then he goes on to make other comments as well about misogynist and homophobe. What do you, how do you answer that? Would it not be better off if it was a little more gentle, a little more benign, maybe?
Well, that's always been the narrative around this. Undoubtedly, Graham Linehan can be bullish in the way he speaks about these issues. But at the same time, I would completely agree with him insofar as he says there's no perfect tone in order to dissent from trans ideology, and I think that's correct. I think J.K. Rowling has had the same view. And, ourselves in Ireland, we have seen well-known, in fact, lauded trans activists in Ireland use expressions like TERF should be smashed out of existence, was one tweet I saw. And there doesn't seem to be the same level of any kind of measures taken against one side of this debate. So I think that there have been far more threats of violence and rape and torture to women in particular who are dissenting against trans ideology. And so I think it's about equality before the law as well. It shouldn't come down on one side and not the other. In Ireland, our constitution, Bunrock na Héireann, enshrines equality before the law. And I think that's where we need to come back to a legislative framework whereby not one side and not one particular group are treated differently because, their feelings are going to be more hurt by something that someone says. And quite often these are debates, certainly when it comes to trans ideology, that we must have open, fair debate.
Yeah, but many of the concerns that he raises, puberty blockers, surgery for trans young people, women's sport, the risk of sex offenders being in women's sport, they're all shared by reasonable people, but it's interesting that people won't present themselves to have those discussions.
Well, I would like to think, with respect, that through our work with the Countess over the last 5 years, I mean, our mission statement was to empower the people of Ireland to discuss the Gender Recognition Act and gender ideology more broadly and how it impacts our life in Ireland and Irish society. And I do think, to be honest with you, the genie is out of the bottle and people are discussing it at the school gates and in the pub amongst themselves. We ran a poll a few years ago that showed that only 17% of people even agree with the premise of self-ID in Ireland, which means that without any body modification whatsoever or intention to transition, whatever that means, that you will still get a chance to change your birth cert so it doesn't say the sex you were born. And so I think we have to really think about this and empower people to discuss it. You know, even recently we saw, you know, what's been taught in the classroom and RC, SPHC classroom, school books. I mean, this ideology has really taken hold in Ireland, particularly in the public sector. And so we are really asking government to take seriously and engage with, for example, the Cass report, the UK Supreme Court ruling. We need clarity. I can tell you multiple instances in Ireland where teenage girls have been forced to change in front of teenage boys because those boys identify as trans. School principals and teachers are really been put in a difficult, awkward position because of the lack of clarity from our government.
And what about the Countess and or yourself, indeed, Laoise? I mean, do you find it hard to get on panels where national media is concerned, for example, around discussions on this? Is that difficult?
I mean, I think the Overton window in Ireland is very small. So it's very much about kind of who's acceptable in terms of whose opinion are acceptable. But, I mean, I was heartened by the fact that, for example, Jennifer O'Connell, writing in the Irish Times, in her opinion piece, you know, kind of conceded a lot of the ground that we've been fighting for the last 5 years. As she said, like many people, you know, I share the concerns about all the things you've just listed, sexual predators in female prison, female sport, the male incursion into female sport, and listed kind of all the areas that we've been trying to bring attention to over the last 5 years. We have various pillars of concern, and that's the way we've kind of broken it down. So in terms of international panels, well, I mean, I try to go and speak locally, regionally. We were just at the Tullis show in County Carlow, where we were very, very popular. And I've done more international media as well, like GB News, Tucker Carlson. So, you know, luckily, because of social media and how ubiquitous it is possible to get your message out, even if the very narrow band of kind of official Ireland, let's say RTE, Virgin Media, Irish Times, you know, if they are slow to turn, I mean, sometimes official Ireland doesn't reflect the actual sentiment on the ground. And that's because of the stranglehold of the NGOs. You know, there's sort of a bubble, if you like, around certain opinions, and they are held in the academy, you know, amongst academics, the media, the mainstream media, and then, of course, the NGOs. But outside of that bubble, I mean, really ordinary people are not okay with trans ideology. They know it's not possible to change sex. They do not want males in their daughters' changing rooms or dressing rooms. And frankly, our position has never been fringe or extreme. It is majority held. And, you know, we've always said, I believe firmly that if a man wants to put on makeup and wear a dress, he should be able to walk down the street and go about his day without being harassed. He shouldn't lose his job or be passed over for promotion. And that is the bar. But he should not be demanding access to female-only spaces. And that's kind of the crux of this.
Where free speech is concerned, do you find some hypocrisy relatively recently as well? That kneecap out there, for instance, and on about free speech, where they're concerned is that they should be allowed to say what they want on a stage, and still they wanted to stifle free speech where another group was concerned. Does that kind of hypocrisy, does that trouble you?
I mean, I thought it was hilarious, really, that they mounted a campaign against a so-called far-right festival. But then, you know, are kind of banging the drum for themselves in terms of free speech. Like, it is extraordinary how people can't see that free speech must be defending the opinions you don't agree with. I mean, it's very easy to use free speech if we all agree, you know, but the point of free speech and freedom of expression is to protect the opinions that you don't agree with, and in particular the opinions that the state does not agree with.
And do you have worries about the imposition of laws through Europe that might happen here for the future, for example?
Yes, well, as you know, ourselves, the Countess and Free Speech Ireland have mounted a pretty successful campaign as grassroots organisations to push back against hate speech legislation. And luckily, the new Minister for Justice did write to Europe saying we're perfectly happy with how we transposed the European directive and we will not be enacting a hate speech element. So that was good, and we all there was a collective sigh of relief. However, there is a larger, bigger picture at play here. A sort of, you could call it an architecture of censorship. And Ireland will become the hub of this new censorship framework. And I'm talking about the Digital Services Act, which will force tech companies like Twitter to essentially delete content before people get a chance to read it. So, and they can be fined up to 6% of their annual profits if they don't comply with these orders from Europe. And we have to remember these orders, these obligations under the DSA, the Digital Services Act, are coming from unelected, unrepresentative technocrats. And I see this as a kind of emblematic of an overreach from Europe. You know, there is a sort of, I mentioned totalitarianism earlier, and there's also a sense of that with these laws. I personally, I'm a proud pro-European, but I don't think it is helpful for Europe to try to codify the laws of member states when it comes to contentious issues. You know, be that trans ideology, but be that immigration. These are conversations that we must have openly and without fear or favour in the public sphere. And, you know, the idea that big tech will be removing posts written by people, and the thing is, it's because it's trans-European, it's across all member states. So if, let's say in Germany, the law kicks in, they will have to be removed in Dublin because of, you know, the number of tech being headquartered here. So it will be across all 27 member states, even if it emanates from one of those countries whereby the threshold is lower.
Laoise, good to talk to you, and thanks for your time this morning. Thank you. Good morning to you. That's Laoise de Brún there, who's the founder of the Countess. The Countess is a non-profit, volunteer-led organisation formed to promote the rights and interests of women and children in Ireland.